Are games racist? Yeah, but not for the reasons that you might think. Racism. It's kind of a thing. Custer's Revenge, the original Jinx from Pokemon, Resident Evil 5, and just about every character from Street Fighter. There is a long history, and it's certainly not every game, and yes, we're about to paint with a very broad brush. But there is a larger and very real issue regarding race. Games that feature human characters are pretty freaking white. According to a landmark 2009 study, 85% of game characters are white. This leaves less than 15% of the video game universe for blacks, Asians, Hispanics, Indians, Native Americans, and mixed race people. You know, just the majority of the people on the planet. This also includes franchises from specific source material, like Batman, where the race is predetermined. Games where you can pick your avatar, like Saints Row, and games like Halo, where the race is unknown. So is it perfect? No, but let's look at some of the top games from the last year. Booker DeWitt and Elizabeth from BioShock Infinite, Trevor and Michael from GTA 5, Joel and Ellie from The Last of Us, Corvo from Dishonored, and of the 6 characters in Borderlands 2, 4 are white, 1 is Hispanic, and 1 is, I don't know. Sure, there are a couple exceptions, but it's pretty accurate to say that whiteness, and more specifically white males, are far and away the default settings. So, do I think video game designers are racists who want to keep Sergeant Ramirez in the back of the virtual bus? No. Except the makers of ethnic cleansing.
Who carries a TV and a handgun?
Those guys are just straight up racist. So, what's going on then? Is it marketing or consumer demand or something else? Well, let's talk about me for a second. I'm half black and half Mexican, also known as Blaxican. And it takes hours of hard work to shape these flowing locks. What's up, ladies? But for game makers and animators, hair is always challenging, and capturing realistic curls is even harder. Why do you think there are so many shaved heads and hats? Pixar Simulation CGI director said that curly hair is hard because one lock has to be stiff to hold the shape, but then soft when it moves. That's one of the reasons why Brave took thousands of hours and more than 1,500 individual strands to make Merida's curls.
And such lovely flowing locks.
So if it's tough for Pixar, who can render each frame with thousands of computers, then how much harder is it for game designers who want to do the exact same thing with your clunky PC or old Xbox? But what about games where hair doesn't matter? Is there something else complicating the process? Yeah, there is. A couple of years ago, I asked a designer friend of mine why there were no non-white little sisters in BioShock Infinite. His answer was simple: you wouldn't be able to see them. To understand why, we need to go all the way back to the Renaissance.
Leonardo da Vinci, I am in your debt.
During that cultural revolution, many strides were made in the arts, including a little thing called chiaroscuro. To emphasize human bodies, painters developed bold contrasts to create volume. It was about putting the European subject of the painting in the spotlight. And this long-standing tradition is carried on to photography, film, and now games. Because so many games are set in dark spaces, dungeons, tunnels, outer space, and so forth, guess who gets a little bit hard to see? That's right, non-white characters. Now, maybe you're thinking, that's interesting, but isn't this whiteness probably also just a reflection of who plays games? Games are a business, and they should market to their consumers, right? Well, they don't. Not even close. A Nielsen study found that African Americans consistently spent more time playing video games than whites did. A Univision study found that Hispanics were more likely than non-Hispanics to buy a console video game and were less affected by price point. Sources in the description. The problem is when game makers do overcome the technical barriers I outlined before, the characters they create tend to be stereotypes, sidekicks, or just not playable. So we end up with characters like Barrett from Final Fantasy VII, Coltrane from Gears of War,
In the flesh, baby.
and that weirdly racist NPC from Deus Ex Human Revolution.
Well, shit.
Oh, and let's not forget the Red Guard of the Elder Scrolls series, black gypsies with a rage problem and a low IQ. Only about 3% of all video game characters were recognized as Hispanic, and of those, only 5% were actually playable. And, with the exception of Connor from Assassin's Creed or Tommy from Prey, the very few Native American characters there are tend to be stereotypically dressed as warriors from like 150 years ago. And unfortunately, even in the independent game scene where many of the commercial constraints have been lifted, the problem persists. Gone Home, Amnesia, Spelunky, Joe Danger, even Brothers features 2 white kids. It's called Brothers. Come on! Of the 38 finalists from last year's Independent Games Festival, only 3, Guacamelee, Samurai Gun, and 7 Grand Steps, featured characters of color. Now, a lot of you are probably thinking, these are just games. It's a fantasy space and we shouldn't worry that much about it. But representation matters.
I be's right here waiting for you, Captain.
A study in New Media and Society showed that media serves as a marker to let members know that their group carries weight in society. Or to put it in political slogan terms, you can't be what you don't see. Besides, we spend 3 billion hours playing games each week, so to pretend this has no effect on our non-virtual world is a bit of a stretch. The reality is that the whitewashing of video game characters is a choice, and we have seen some complex, deep characters who aren't white. Papo and Yo follows a Brazilian boy dealing with an abusive alcoholic father. Aveline de Grand Prix is a rare mixed-race character and a brave one at that. And Lee is a college professor trying to escape his past and a loving surrogate to a young girl against all odds. But no matter who else you can think of, these characters are the exception, not the rule. And to butcher a quote by someone much more important than I am, I want to live in a world where video game characters are not judged by the color of their virtual skin, but by the content of their character stats. Ideally, games should reflect the world that we live in, or at the very least reflect the gaming community that plays them. Will it be easy? No, I just told you why it would be difficult. But we can do better. So what do you think? Do games have a race problem? Hash it out in the comments, and if you like what you saw, please subscribe. I will see you next week. Last week we talked about why games make us so angry. Let's see what you had to say. Ryan Eichelberger points out that it's not so great if your rage in a game becomes misdirected, like you take it out on yourself or other people or friends, etc. Yeah, that's not good, never good. I think we should just talk about anger in the context of the game. It's not good if you're losing a basketball game and you punch the ref out either. Googie God asked what's going on in the background of the show. It's a great question. You're the first person to actually ask. These are actually all prints by a guy named Ian Andrews who takes amazing in-game photography. You can check out his blog, Steam Postcards. We'll link to it in the description. Dr. TG2, this is one of the best humble brags I've seen in quite some time. No, we're not saying that anger always makes you a better player. We're just saying that it can. To Nathan Stevens and others who asked about Mike, I'm just kind of tall. Zequix argues that anger actually makes you worse. In League of Legends, it's called going on the tilt. That's a really good point. We didn't really get into this in the episode, but yeah, it has to do with what you do with that anger. Michael Jordan loved to play angry, and other athletes too. Larry Bird, on the other hand, liked to make other players angry because he knew it would mess them up. So yeah, there are different approaches to using anger in the game. To Shane Tilton, who summed up our episode very nicely, a poor craftsman blames his tools. Distro makes a good point about anger that's related to like the story of the game. I would say that's actually different because your anger can't actually change the outcome. You can be totally angry about the end of Mass Effect, but no number of letters. Oh wait, that's right, they did change that. Jurassic pointed to a bunch of games that might not make you angry. We're not saying that it's a requirement. Not all games have to make you angry. There are plenty that don't. It's just that if they do, that's not always a bad thing.